Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where history comes alive in calm and immersive stories. Sit back, relax, and let the echoes of the past guide you into a peaceful journey through time. World War II remains one of the most catastrophic and transformative events in modern history. The scale of the conflict, the sheer number of lives lost, and the enormous impact it had on nations, societies, and families are almost impossible to comprehend fully. For the millions of soldiers who served on the front lines, survival was not a guarantee. Every day presented new threats, both visible and invisible, and the conditions they faced were unlike anything most civilians could imagine. Being an American soldier in World War II meant stepping into a world where danger was constant, and the line between life and death was razor thin. The conflict stretched across multiple continents, from the icy, bomb-ravaged cities of Europe to the sweltering, disease-ridden islands of the Pacific. In both theaters, American soldiers faced extreme physical, mental, and emotional challenges. Survival was not merely a matter of courage. It required skill, endurance, adaptability, and, often, a bit of luck. When we consider what it would be like to walk in the shoes of these soldiers, it is crucial to start with the historical context. America entered the war in December 1941 after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. This sudden thrust into a global conflict sent thousands of young men and women into a reality for which few were truly prepared. Many of these individuals came from rural towns, bustling cities, and suburban neighborhoods, all with varying levels of education and life experience. Their backgrounds often influenced how they adapted to military life, yet the training and the battlefield would test everyone equally. Before even setting foot on foreign soil, these soldiers underwent rigorous training. Boot camp was designed to prepare them for the unimaginable horrors they would face, yet it was as much a psychological trial as a physical one. Imagine being woken at the crack of dawn, often before the sun had risen, with the cold or damp air seeping through your uniform. Your body is pushed to its limits with endless drills, long marches carrying heavy packs, and repetitive exercises meant to instill discipline and endurance. Drill instructors were notoriously strict, using both verbal and physical pressure to break down recruits' initial resistance and reshape them into soldiers. Many veterans of the war would later recall that the toughest part of boot camp was not the physical strain but the mental challenge, the constant pressure to conform, to obey without hesitation, and to develop the focus required for survival in combat. The training itself was intense and multifaceted. Soldiers learned to handle rifles, pistols, and grenades, often under strict time constraints that simulated battlefield conditions. They studied tactics for trench warfare, amphibious landings, and hand-to-hand combat. They memorized signals, maps, and procedures for both offensive and defensive maneuvers. The instructor's goal was to ensure that every recruit could respond instinctively under pressure, because hesitation in combat could mean death, not just for the individual soldier, but for the entire unit. Beyond the technical aspects of warfare, training also emphasized endurance. Soldiers ran miles every day, often with little food and minimal rest, to build stamina and resilience. Their meals were designed to be basic, but nutritious enough to sustain their bodies through extreme physical exertion. The psychological component of training aimed to instill confidence and remove fear while teaching recruits to operate effectively in a team, because cohesion and trust could be the difference between survival and casualty. Once the training was complete, soldiers were sent to the theaters of war. For many, the first glimpse of the front lines was shocking. In Europe, they confronted cities and villages reduced to rubble by relentless bombing campaigns. The winters were harsh and unforgiving. Soldiers huddled in trenches that offered some protection from enemy fire, but were often waterlogged, muddy, and crawling with vermin. Every day presented the constant threat of attack artillery shells, sniper fire, and air raids created an environment of perpetual tension. Living conditions were primitive. Soldiers slept in tents or dugouts, often without adequate heating. Frostbite and hypothermia were real dangers in the winter months. In addition, sanitation was a major concern. The combination of crowded living spaces, poor hygiene, and contaminated water sources made outbreaks of disease common. Soldiers had to be vigilant not only against enemy attacks, but also against the infections that could spread silently through their units. In the Pacific Theater, American soldiers faced a completely different set of challenges. The jungles and islands presented an environment that was as lethal as the enemy itself. Dense vegetation, oppressive heat, and swarms of insects made movement slow and exhausting. Tropical diseases such as malaria and dysentery were rampant, and medical treatment was often limited. Supplies were difficult to transport, and soldiers frequently faced shortages of food, clean water, and ammunition. Survival here required not only courage in combat, but also the ability to adapt to a hostile and unforgiving environment. The soldiers learned to navigate thick jungles, ford rivers, and construct makeshift shelters to protect themselves from both the elements and enemy forces. Every patrol and mission carried risks beyond combat. Hidden traps, poisonous snakes, and the constant threat of ambush made even a routine march a test of nerves and skill. Food and nutrition were another critical factor in a soldier's daily survival. Rations were designed to be portable and durable, but often left soldiers longing for a taste of home. Canned meats, hardtack biscuits, powdered eggs, and instant coffee formed the bulk of meals. While these rations could sustain a soldier's body, they provided little comfort or variety. Soldiers quickly learned to appreciate any fresh food they could acquire, whether from local sources, captured supplies, or small parcels sent from home. Eating was often a hurried, functional activity, done in moments of relative safety rather than at leisurely meals. Despite these hardships, camaraderie among soldiers often provided the psychological sustenance they needed. Shared meals, jokes, and stories from home helped maintain morale and provided a sense of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic environment. The psychological demands on soldiers were immense. Fear was a constant companion, whether waiting for an attack, navigating a minefield, or hearing the distant rumble of artillery. Sleep was scarce, and exhaustion compounded stress levels, making even simple tasks more difficult. Soldiers were trained to cope with these pressures, but the reality of war often exceeded anything imagined in training. Many veterans recalled the sudden, unpredictable nature of combat as the most shocking element. One moment, they were marching through a quiet field. The next, they were under heavy fire, forced to take cover and return fire instinctively. The ability to remain calm, make rapid decisions, and rely on fellow soldiers was essential for survival. Letters from home, small personal items, and moments of humor provided relief from the mental strain. Soldiers often formed tight, knit groups, relying on each other for support. Bonds formed under such extreme circumstances were profound and often lifelong. However, not every soldier was able to cope equally. Some experienced what was then called battle fatigue, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, anxiety, and emotional numbness were common after intense combat, highlighting the mental toll that extended far beyond the battlefield. American soldiers also faced moral and ethical challenges. The realities of war often forced them to make decisions that could have life or death consequences for themselves and others. They encountered civilians caught in the conflict, enemy combatants, and the ethical dilemmas of following orders that conflicted with personal morals. These situations required judgment under extreme stress, and the psychological impact of these choices could linger long after the fighting ended. Survival, ultimately, was not just a matter of individual skill or strength. It required trust in one's unit, adherence to training, situational awareness, and sometimes sheer luck. Many soldiers credited their survival to moments of chance, a missed shell, a timely warning from a comrade, or finding cover just in time. Others reflected on how experience, intuition, and quick thinking had saved them in situations where brute strength alone would not have sufficed. Every day was a new challenge, and every decision could tip the balance between life and death. By imagining oneself as an American soldier in World War II, it becomes clear that survival was an ongoing, multifaceted struggle. It was about enduring harsh training, adapting to hostile environments, coping with fear and fatigue, and relying on others while maintaining hope. It was about facing situations where the stakes were always life or death, and where the margin for error was virtually non-existent. To survive, a soldier had to be physically capable, mentally resilient, emotionally strong, and adaptable to constantly changing circumstances. This was not a life of glamour or heroism as often depicted in films. It was a relentless test of human endurance and spirit. In the end, the question of whether one could survive as an American soldier in World War II cannot be answered simply. Survival depended on countless variables: the soldier's training, physical condition, mental resilience, environment, luck, and the support of comrades. Some survived and went on to share their stories, while others made the ultimate sacrifice, their lives forever a testament to the human cost of war. To imagine yourself in their shoes is to confront the realities of courage, endurance, and resilience in a way that few other experiences demand. It is a sobering reminder of the sacrifices made by those who served and the unimaginable conditions they faced daily. It challenges us to understand not only the physical demands of war, but also the profound psychological and emotional burdens carried by every soldier. World War II tested the very limits of human survival. For the American soldiers who stepped onto foreign soil, the question was never theoretical. Every day, every decision, and every action mattered. Could you endure the harsh training, the unrelenting environmental challenges, the chaos of combat, and the constant psychological strain? Could you survive when death was never far away, and when hope sometimes felt like a fragile, fleeting thing? History offers us countless examples of bravery, endurance, and resilience, but it also reminds us that survival was never guaranteed. In imagining this journey, we gain a deeper appreciation for the courage and sacrifices of those who fought, and, above all, the extraordinary human capacity to endure in the face of unimaginable adversity. Before an American soldier could even set foot on the battlefield during World War II, they had to survive something just as grueling and demanding in its own way: boot camp. The transformation from a civilian into a soldier was no small task, and boot camp was designed to challenge every facet of a person's physical, mental, and emotional being. For many young Americans, often in their late teens or early 20s, the experience was an entirely new world. They were uprooted from familiar surroundings, small towns, bustling cities, family homes, and placed into a highly structured, regimented environment where obedience, endurance, and adaptability were demanded above all else. This period of training was the first true test of whether they could survive the rigors of war. From the moment recruits arrived at training camps scattered across the United States, the intensity was immediate. Drill instructors, sometimes towering figures with booming voices, greeted them with strict authority, ensuring that any sense of civilian independence was quickly replaced with military discipline. The first days were often a shock. Recruits were stripped of personal possessions, issued uniforms and gear, and given clear instructions that every moment of their day would now be dictated by the military schedule. Sleep schedules, meal times, physical training, and classroom instruction were all meticulously planned, leaving little room for free will. The abrupt loss of personal autonomy could be disorienting, and many recruits reported feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or even resentful during their initial days. Yet this deliberate breaking down of old habits and routines was intended to prepare them for the chaos and unpredictability of wartime conditions. Physical training was the most obvious and immediate challenge. Recruits were put through grueling exercises designed to build strength, stamina, and endurance. Long runs, often in formation, were conducted in all weather conditions: rain, snow, blistering sun, and with heavy packs to simulate the burden of combat gear. Push-ups, sit-ups, obstacle courses, and calisthenics were performed daily, sometimes until exhaustion. Soldiers quickly learned that physical discomfort was constant and unavoidable. These exercises were not mere punishment. They were intended to condition the body for the relentless strain of combat. Muscles were tested, lungs expanded, and joints forced to endure repetitive stress. Over time, recruits adapted, often surpassing what they thought was physically possible. Yet even the fittest individuals faced moments of doubt and exhaustion, a mental struggle that would become invaluable once they faced the battlefield. But boot camp was far more than a physical trial. Psychological resilience was just as critical. Drill instructors used a combination of intimidation, shouting, and strict discipline to push recruits to their mental limits. Every mistake was met with immediate correction, often delivered in a manner designed to test patience and focus. The objective was to teach recruits to operate under stress, to follow orders instinctively, and to suppress hesitation, an essential skill when facing life-threatening situations on the front lines. Recruits were trained to act decisively and trust in their instincts, knowing that hesitation could be fatal. The mental conditioning extended beyond drills and physical exercises. Soldiers were subjected to simulated battle scenarios, forced marches, and challenging problem-solving exercises that required teamwork and split-second decision-making. These exercises mirrored the unpredictable nature of combat and tested the ability to remain composed under pressure. One of the most challenging aspects of boot camp was learning to master weapons. Soldiers were trained extensively in the use of rifles, pistols, grenades, and other equipment they would rely on in combat. Target practice, often under time constraints or simulated stress, forced recruits to develop accuracy and composure. Handling explosives and firearms required meticulous attention to detail, discipline, and respect for the danger inherent in each tool. Mistakes could be deadly, and instructors emphasized that carelessness was unacceptable. Soldiers learned not only how to fire their weapons, but also how to maintain them under field conditions, a skill that could mean the difference between life and death in harsh combat environments. Beyond individual skill, boot camp focused heavily on teamwork and unit cohesion. Soldiers were trained to operate not as individuals, but as members of a coordinated unit. They learned to rely on one another, to communicate effectively under stress, and to anticipate the needs of comrades in high-pressure scenarios. These lessons extended to mock combat situations, where recruits had to execute complex maneuvers while under simulated fire. Success required synchronization, trust, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. For many soldiers, these experiences fostered bonds that would prove crucial in the field. They discovered that survival often depended not only on personal capability, but on the strength and reliability of the team. Rations and sustenance were another critical aspect of life in training camps. Recruits were fed basic meals, often designed more for functionality than enjoyment. Corned beef, hardtack, canned vegetables, and powdered milk formed the staples of their diet. Meals were sometimes hurried, consumed between drills or during brief moments of rest. The simplicity and monotony of the diet were intentional. Soldiers needed to adapt to functioning on limited resources, just as they would need to in the field. Many veterans recalled that the taste and quality of food was a far cry from home cooking, yet the nutritional value and efficiency of these meals were key to sustaining them through intense physical activity. Sanitation and hygiene were emphasized, but conditions were not always ideal. Soldiers learned to maintain personal cleanliness in challenging circumstances, a skill that would become vital on the battlefield where disease could be as dangerous as enemy fire. Recruits were taught to clean their uniforms and equipment, manage basic medical needs, and recognize the signs of infection or illness. These lessons, while mundane in appearance, were part of the larger goal of preparing soldiers to survive in environments where conditions were often harsh, unpredictable, and unsanitary. Sleep was another challenge during boot camp. Recruits were often woken before sunrise and subjected to long, exhausting days of drills, instruction, and physical training. Nights provided little relief, with strict schedules, inspections, and occasional exercises or alerts disrupting rest. Fatigue was a constant companion, and soldiers quickly learned to function under exhaustion, a skill that would become essential in combat. The lack of sleep tested not only physical endurance but mental sharpness, forcing recruits to develop resilience and adaptability. Veterans frequently recalled that learning to operate effectively with minimal rest was one of the most valuable, if grueling, aspects of their training. Perhaps one of the most psychologically demanding aspects of boot camp was the culture of constant evaluation and expectation. Every action, from how a soldier marched to how they polished their boots, was scrutinized. Recruits were judged continuously, and their performance determined how quickly they would advance or whether they would face disciplinary measures. Mistakes were amplified and used as teaching moments, often accompanied by stern correction or public admonishment. The purpose was not cruelty but preparation. Soldiers needed to be capable of performing under observation, stress, and pressure, traits that would be indispensable when facing the chaos of battle. An equally important component of training was education. Soldiers were instructed in military strategy, navigation, map reading, communication protocols, and the broader context of the war. Understanding the objectives, strategies, and potential dangers they would face gave recruits a framework for their actions and decisions. Knowledge was power, and the more they understood about their role, the more effective they could be in the field. Instruction often included lessons on survival skills, such as finding food and water in adverse conditions, basic first aid, and techniques for camouflage and evasion. These skills reinforced the importance of self-reliance while simultaneously teaching soldiers how to work cohesively within a unit. The social aspect of boot camp also played a critical role. Recruits were suddenly living among hundreds of peers, many from entirely different backgrounds, cultures, and regions of the country. The process of building camaraderie, learning to trust and rely on others, and navigating interpersonal dynamics under extreme stress was essential. Friendships forged during training often became lifelines in combat. Soldiers learned the value of humor, shared hardship, and mutual support as coping mechanisms, tools they would use repeatedly on the battlefield. Stories from veterans highlight the wide range of experiences during boot camp. Some remembered the camaraderie, the shared laughter, and the bonds formed through collective struggle. Others recalled the moments of intense fear, exhaustion, and self-doubt, questioning whether they were capable of meeting the demands placed upon them. For all, however, boot camp marked a turning point, a period in which ordinary civilians were transformed into soldiers, mentally and physically prepared to face the horrors of war. The intensity, discipline, and endurance required in those weeks and months created a foundation for survival, teaching recruits lessons that went far beyond combat. Training also instilled an understanding of leadership and responsibility. Soldiers learned that their actions affected not only themselves but also their comrades. Mistakes could jeopardize entire units, and quick, decisive action was often required. Leadership was taught at every level, from small teams to larger units, emphasizing initiative, accountability, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. These lessons were tested repeatedly during exercises, often under simulated combat conditions that forced recruits to apply what they had learned in real time. By the time boot camp concluded, soldiers had undergone a profound transformation. They had endured physical exhaustion, mental strain, and emotional pressure that far exceeded what most civilians would ever experience. They had learned to handle weapons, navigate difficult terrain, cooperate in teams, and make critical decisions under stress. They had developed resilience, adaptability, and the ability to perform under extreme conditions. These skills and traits formed the foundation upon which their survival in World War II would depend. Veterans often looked back on this period as one of the most demanding yet formative experiences of their lives. Survival in war, as boot camp taught, began long before the first shot was fired. It required preparation, discipline, and an understanding of one's own limits and capabilities. The lessons learned in those early days would become indispensable on the battlefield, where fatigue, fear, and unpredictability would constantly test every recruit's training, resolve, and courage. For an American soldier stepping into the global conflict of World War II, boot camp was the first crucible of survival, shaping men and women into warriors capable of enduring extraordinary adversity. The question was never whether they would be tested. It was whether they could endure, adapt, and survive. Once a soldier completed training, they were sent to the front lines, where the real test of survival began. The battlefield was a harsh and unforgiving environment, where every day posed new dangers, both visible and hidden. Life in the trenches in Europe, or in the makeshift camps and jungles of the Pacific, required a level of resilience and adaptability that few civilians could imagine. For American soldiers, survival depended not only on skill in combat, but also on the ability to endure extreme environmental conditions, scarcity of resources, and the relentless pressures of constant threat. In Europe, many soldiers found themselves in trenches, long, narrow ditches dug into the earth to provide protection from enemy fire. Trenches were often muddy and waterlogged, particularly during rainy seasons, which created a persistent discomfort. Soldiers frequently wore wet socks and boots, their feet prone to trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp, unsanitary conditions. Vermin, including rats and lice, were constant companions, spreading disease and adding to the mental strain of trench life. Despite these challenges, soldiers relied on each other for support, sharing tasks such as digging, sentry duty, and maintaining the trenches. Life was monotonous in many ways, punctuated by periods of intense fear during artillery barrages, sniper attacks, or sudden infantry charges. The trenches themselves were a study in contrasts. On one hand, they provided a measure of safety and strategic advantage. On the other, they were claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and hazardous. Soldiers slept in dugouts or makeshift shelters, often with limited protection from the elements. Cold winters in Europe made warmth a precious commodity. Blankets were scarce, and clothing often became saturated in the rain or snow. Frostbite and hypothermia were real threats, forcing soldiers to find creative ways to stay warm, such as huddling together or improvising with scraps of material. Mental endurance was just as important as physical stamina, as the constant exposure to discomfort could erode morale and focus. Sanitation in the trenches was minimal, and disease was a constant concern. Latrines were often rudimentary, and water sources could be contaminated. Soldiers were trained to boil water when possible, but the risk of illness remained high. Dysentery, typhus, and other infectious diseases claimed lives even before soldiers encountered the enemy. Preventive measures such as hygiene drills, vaccinations, and inspections were routine, yet they could do little to eliminate the omnipresent risk. Survival required vigilance, not only against the enemy, but against invisible threats that could strike silently. Food was another daily challenge. Rations were designed to be portable and long-lasting, but they were far from luxurious. Canned meats, hard biscuits, powdered eggs, and coffee formed the bulk of sustenance. Soldiers learned to stretch limited supplies, improvising when possible with local resources or captured enemy provisions. Foraging for fresh food, when feasible, could be dangerous but offered a welcome change from monotonous rations. Meals were often consumed quickly and under less than ideal circumstances, sometimes while on patrol, during short breaks in combat, or even while on the move. The ability to remain nourished despite these challenges was critical for both physical and mental survival. In addition to the harsh physical environment, soldiers faced psychological pressures that were relentless. Constant exposure to death, injury, and destruction took a toll on mental health. The unpredictability of combat created a pervasive sense of tension, where even routine tasks could become deadly. Soldiers had to maintain vigilance at all times, balancing fear with discipline and focus. Letters from home, camaraderie with fellow soldiers, and small moments of humor or distraction were crucial for maintaining morale. Many veterans recalled that the bonds formed in the trenches were among the strongest of their lives, providing both emotional support and practical assistance in moments of crisis. The Pacific Theater presented an entirely different set of environmental challenges. Soldiers deployed to islands and jungles faced extreme heat, humidity, and dense vegetation that made movement slow and exhausting. Insects, poisonous snakes, and other wildlife added to the hazards of daily life. Tropical diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and dysentery were widespread, and medical resources were often limited. Survival required constant attention to hygiene, water safety, and disease prevention. Soldiers improvised shelters, often constructing temporary huts or utilizing natural cover to protect themselves from the elements and enemy observation. Navigation through dense jungle terrain demanded skill, patience, and awareness of the environment, as hidden pitfalls and natural hazards were ever present. Combat conditions in both theaters intensify the hardships. In Europe, artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and sudden enemy advances required soldiers to act quickly and decisively. Even minor mistakes could result in injury or death. In the Pacific, ambushes, booby traps, and the unpredictability of jungle warfare created a persistent state of alertness. Soldiers learned to move silently, observe carefully, and anticipate danger, often relying on intuition as much as training. Survival in these circumstances was not merely about strength or courage, but about situational awareness, adaptability, and teamwork. Sleep was rare and often disrupted. Soldiers rested whenever possible, but quiet moments were brief and sometimes interrupted by enemy action, environmental conditions, or the responsibilities of sentry duty. Exhaustion compounded other challenges, reducing mental sharpness and physical coordination. Soldiers learned to function on minimal rest, developing habits that balanced the need for recuperation with the demands of survival. Many veterans later recounted that coping with chronic fatigue was one of the most difficult aspects of their service, requiring mental toughness and strategic planning to maintain energy and focus. The monotony of trench or jungle life, punctuated by moments of extreme danger, created a unique psychological landscape. Soldiers became acutely aware of the fragility of life, yet they also developed resilience and resourcefulness. Simple acts, lighting a fire, securing a clean water source, sharing a meal, or repairing equipment, took on profound significance. Each successful action reinforced a sense of agency and survival, fostering confidence even in the midst of chaos. At the same time, the constant exposure to risk demanded emotional regulation, as fear, grief, and frustration could quickly overwhelm if not managed carefully. Social dynamics within trenches and camps played a crucial role in survival. Soldiers relied heavily on their comrades, forming tight, knit groups where trust and cooperation were essential. Division of labor, mutual protection, and shared problem-solving allowed soldiers to endure harsh conditions more effectively. Humor, storytelling, and camaraderie provided relief from stress, helping soldiers maintain morale and mental stability. These relationships were often tested under extreme conditions, yet they became lifelines in environments where every day was a struggle against both human and natural threats. Medical care was often limited, especially in remote or contested areas. Wounds, infections, and illnesses had to be treated with whatever supplies were available, sometimes under fire or in improvised medical stations. Soldiers learned basic first aid and self-care, understanding that their own survival often depended on proactive attention to health. Field medics were invaluable, yet even their skills could be overwhelmed by the scale of casualties or the severity of environmental conditions. Understanding the limitations of available medical care, soldiers adapted strategies for prevention, early detection, and treatment of illness and injury. Weather was an omnipresent factor influencing daily life and survival. In Europe, winter storms could halt movement, reduce visibility, and create treacherous conditions in the trenches. Soldiers struggled against freezing temperatures, ice, snow, and sleet, often with inadequate clothing or shelter. In the Pacific, monsoon rains turned terrain into mud, flooded camps, and increased the risk of waterborne disease. Soldiers learned to anticipate, adapt, and endure, understanding that mastery over these elements was as important as combat skills. Improvisation became a critical survival skill, whether creating rain shelters, finding dry ground, or protecting supplies from moisture. Supply lines and logistics were constant concerns. Soldiers depended on timely delivery of food, ammunition, and equipment, yet these could be disrupted by enemy action or environmental challenges. Resourcefulness was essential. Soldiers learned to ration supplies, repair damaged equipment, and improvise solutions in the field. Scavenging from the environment, repurposing materials, and relying on local resources became vital strategies. Survival required not only physical strength and combat readiness, but also ingenuity and careful planning to mitigate the limitations imposed by the environment and logistical constraints. Psychological endurance extended beyond fear of death to include isolation, homesickness, and uncertainty. Soldiers often went weeks or months without hearing from loved ones, unsure of their safety or the progress of the war. The lack of control over these circumstances tested mental resilience. Soldiers developed coping mechanisms, drawing on camaraderie, personal routines, small pleasures, and a focus on immediate tasks. Humor, music, letters, and storytelling became crucial tools for maintaining morale and mental stability. Veterans frequently cited these simple but meaningful activities as essential for enduring the relentless pressures of frontline life. Despite the hardships, soldiers demonstrated extraordinary adaptability and resourcefulness. They learned to navigate unfamiliar terrain, manage scarce resources, and respond effectively to unpredictable dangers. Each day required attention to countless details: securing shelter, maintaining weapons, conserving energy, avoiding disease, and remaining vigilant against enemy action. Success depended on combining training, experience, intuition, and cooperation. Every small achievement reinforced confidence and reinforced habits that could mean the difference between survival and injury or death. For many soldiers, survival became a matter of habit and instinct. Daily routines, learned behaviors, and accumulated experience shaped responses to challenges. The repetitive nature of some tasks, digging, patrolling, repairing equipment, preparing meals, became a source of stability amid chaos. These routines provided structure, helped maintain morale, and allowed soldiers to conserve energy for critical moments when quick thinking and decisive action were required. In both the European and Pacific theaters, survival was not guaranteed. Soldiers faced constant threats from combat, environmental hazards, disease, and scarcity. Yet those who endured did so through a combination of preparation, adaptability, mental resilience, teamwork, and ingenuity. Their experiences highlight the multidimensional nature of survival, encompassing physical endurance, psychological strength, social cohesion, and strategic resource management. Understanding life in trenches and camps provides insight into the daily reality of war and the extraordinary efforts required for soldiers to persevere under conditions that were often harsh, unpredictable, and lethal. Combat in World War II was an experience unlike any other, a terrifying and unpredictable confrontation with death, chaos, and the limits of human endurance. For American soldiers, every battle presented new challenges, dangers, and choices that could determine not only their own survival, but the lives of their comrades. The battlefield was a place of constant threat, where the ordinary rules of daily life no longer applied, replaced instead by fear, adrenaline, and the urgent need for action. Surviving in this environment required not only training and physical skill, but mental toughness, adaptability, and an almost instinctive ability to read danger and respond with precision. From the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, from the Pacific Islands to the deserts of North Africa, combat took many forms. In Europe, soldiers encountered entrenched positions, fortified bunkers, and heavily armed enemy forces. Machine guns, artillery, sniper fire, and bombs created a persistent state of danger that could erupt at any moment. The sound of distant explosions, the whistle of incoming shells, and the shouts of comrades became the background to every movement. Every patrol, every advance, every decision carried consequences that could be fatal. The unpredictability of the battlefield demanded constant vigilance and mental agility. Soldiers had to make split-second decisions under extreme stress, often relying on both training and intuition to survive. In the Pacific theater, the dangers were compounded by the environment. Dense jungles, treacherous swamps, and hidden enemy positions created a battlefield where visibility was limited and ambushes could occur without warning. Japanese forces were known for their use of guerrilla tactics, including booby traps, camouflaged positions, and nighttime assaults. Soldiers had to navigate difficult terrain while maintaining readiness for sudden attacks. The environment itself could be as deadly as the enemy, with disease, poisonous snakes, insects, and extreme weather contributing to the constant struggle for survival. Every step required awareness, patience, and caution, as a single miscalculation could lead to injury or death. The physical demands of combat were extreme. Soldiers carried heavy packs filled with weapons, ammunition, food, and personal gear, often for long distances over difficult terrain. Movement had to be deliberate, stealthy, and coordinated with the unit to avoid detection and maximize effectiveness. Combat required bursts of intense energy, sprinting under fire, climbing obstacles, dragging wounded comrades, or manning weapons positions for extended periods. Fatigue, hunger, and injury compounded the difficulty, yet soldiers were trained to continue operating under these conditions. Physical conditioning, developed during boot camp, became essential, as the demands of real combat often exceeded even the most grueling exercises in training. One of the most harrowing aspects of combat was the constant presence of death and injury. Soldiers witnessed the immediate consequences of war on their comrades and the enemy, experiences that could be psychologically overwhelming. The sounds, sights, and smells of battle left lasting impressions. Explosions threw dirt and debris into the air, bullets whizzed past, and the cries of the wounded or dying echoed through the battlefield. Maintaining composure in this environment was critical. Soldiers learned to compartmentalize fear and shock, focusing on immediate tasks and survival rather than the overwhelming reality of destruction around them. In addition to physical and psychological challenges, combat required strategic thinking and quick decision-making. Soldiers had to assess threats, anticipate enemy movements, and respond appropriately while coordinating with their unit. Tactical knowledge gained during training became vital, as understanding terrain, cover, and positioning could mean the difference between life and death. Soldiers often faced situations with incomplete information, forcing them to rely on judgment and experience. Mistakes could be fatal, emphasizing the importance of precision, discipline, and adaptability in the chaos of battle. Weaponry in World War II varied widely and added another layer of complexity and danger. Rifles, machine guns, grenades, mortars, and artillery were essential tools, yet each came with inherent risks. Soldiers had to maintain and operate weapons effectively under stress, often with limited time and challenging conditions. Malfunctions could be deadly, and improper handling could result in accidental injury. Familiarity with weaponry, combined with steady nerves, was crucial for survival. The constant threat of incoming fire meant that soldiers had to act quickly, often relying on instincts honed through training and experience. Combat also demanded teamwork and coordination. Soldiers operated as part of squads, platoons, or larger units, where individual actions could impact the survival of others. Trust in comrades, clear communication, and adherence to strategy were essential. Soldiers had to cover one another, relay information under fire, and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Team cohesion often determined success or failure in engagements, emphasizing the importance of relationships forged during training and shared experience. Comradeship provided both practical support and emotional resilience, as facing danger together created bonds that strengthened morale and determination. Fear was omnipresent in combat, yet soldiers learned to manage it. The human body reacts naturally to danger with adrenaline, increased heart rate, and heightened senses. Soldiers had to harness these responses, channeling them into focus and effective action rather than panic. Training, discipline, and experience helped soldiers regulate fear, enabling them to make clear decisions under extreme pressure. Veterans often recalled that the first encounters with enemy fire were the most terrifying, but repeated exposure built confidence and a certain level of emotional resilience. Understanding and accepting fear as a natural part of survival became a critical skill on the battlefield. Environmental conditions influenced combat in profound ways. Mud, snow, heat, humidity, and rain could all affect movement, visibility, and weapon functionality. Soldiers adapted techniques to cope with slippery terrain, limited visibility, and extreme temperatures. Maintaining equipment, clothing, and personal health under these conditions was essential. In some instances, the environment itself could be exploited strategically, such as using dense foliage for cover or high ground for observation. Yet the same elements could also create hazards, requiring constant vigilance and adaptability. In addition to facing external threats, soldiers often confronted internal challenges: exhaustion, hunger, thirst, injury, and illness. Combat conditions were physically and mentally draining, and the ability to endure hardship was as critical as tactical skill. Soldiers had to manage energy, prioritize tasks, and support one another in times of weakness. Small victories, such as securing a position, aiding a wounded comrade, or successfully navigating terrain, provided essential motivation and reinforced the skills necessary for continued survival. Communication was a vital component of combat effectiveness and survival. Soldiers relied on radios, runners, hand signals, and coded messages to coordinate movements and report enemy activity. Disrupted or unclear, communication could result in confusion, misdirected fire, or exposure to danger. Soldiers learned to improvise and adapt, maintaining coordination even when standard channels failed. Effective communication was closely linked to teamwork and trust, reinforcing the importance of cohesion and mutual reliance in high-stress situations. The unpredictability of combat meant that luck often played a role in survival. Some soldiers survived near-miss situations, missed artillery shells, or enemy mistakes, while others fell to hazards that seemed unavoidable. Veterans frequently reflected on how chance influenced outcomes, highlighting the role of both preparation and fortune in surviving wartime encounters. Recognizing the limits of control, soldiers focused on what they could influence: their actions, awareness, teamwork, and adherence to training. In addition to combat with enemy forces, soldiers had to navigate the moral and ethical dimensions of warfare. Decisions made in the heat of battle could have lasting consequences, affecting civilians, prisoners, and fellow soldiers. Soldiers were trained to follow orders and adhere to military law, but the realities of war often presented complex situations requiring judgment and integrity. The psychological impact of these decisions could linger long after the battle, shaping perspectives and emotional resilience. Medical challenges in combat were constant. Wounds, injuries, and illness required immediate attention, often under dangerous and difficult circumstances. Field medics worked tirelessly, treating casualties with limited supplies and under fire. Soldiers learned basic first aid and were often responsible for assisting their wounded comrades. Timely and effective medical intervention could mean the difference between survival and death. The presence of skilled medics, combined with knowledge and preparedness, contributed significantly to the chances of enduring combat. The duration and intensity of combat varied widely. Some engagements lasted hours, while others spanned days or weeks. Extended periods of fighting tested endurance, resilience, and mental focus. Soldiers had to pace themselves, conserve energy, and maintain alertness despite fatigue and stress. Long campaigns required both physical and emotional stamina, as the cumulative effects of combat could erode morale and performance. Veterans often emphasized the importance of routine, small comforts, and mutual support in sustaining themselves through prolonged engagements. Adaptability was a critical survival skill. Combat situations evolved rapidly, with unexpected obstacles, enemy movements, and environmental changes. Soldiers had to respond flexibly, adjusting strategies and tactics to meet new challenges. This required a combination of training, experience, intuition, and improvisation. The ability to adapt could determine whether a soldier survived an encounter or succumbed to the hazards of the battlefield. Despite the horrors and dangers, soldiers often found moments of courage, heroism, and ingenuity. Small acts, rescuing a comrade under fire, holding a critical position, or devising an innovative tactic, could have profound consequences. These moments highlighted the extraordinary capacity for human endurance and creativity, even in the most perilous circumstances. Stories of bravery and resilience from World War II illustrate how soldiers navigated the deadly complexity of combat, balancing fear, strategy, and determination. Ultimately, survival in combat was multidimensional. It required physical skill, mental toughness, teamwork, situational awareness, resourcefulness, adaptability, and sometimes luck. Soldiers faced threats from enemy fire, the environment, disease, injury, and psychological strain. Each encounter demanded a combination of preparation, instinct, and courage. The lessons learned in training were essential, but the unpredictable nature of combat constantly tested even the most skilled and experienced soldiers. Survival was never guaranteed, yet through resilience, cooperation, and perseverance, many endured. The battlefield of World War II was a place where ordinary individuals were confronted with extraordinary challenges. Every soldier faced the same fundamental question: how to survive when danger is constant, resources are limited, and the environment is hostile. Training, discipline, courage, and determination were essential, but so too were adaptability, intuition, and the support of comrades. Those who survived did so by mastering the interplay of these elements, navigating the chaos of combat with skill and resilience. Their experiences provide a profound insight into the realities of war, illustrating the immense physical, mental, and emotional demands placed on soldiers and the extraordinary capacity of humans to endure in the face of relentless danger. While the physical demands of World War II were immense, the psychological challenges faced by American soldiers were equally grueling and often far more insidious. War tested not only the body but the mind, exposing soldiers to continuous stress, fear, and trauma that could linger long after the battlefield had been left behind. For many, survival was as much a matter of mental resilience as physical skill. The constant threat of death, the experience of witnessing horrors, the separation from home, and the relentless strain of combat created an environment where maintaining psychological stability was one of the most difficult tasks a soldier could face. From the moment they arrived on the battlefield, soldiers were confronted with situations that exceeded anything they had experienced in training. The unpredictability of combat, the chaotic nature of engagements, and the immediate presence of death and injury created an ever-present tension. Even in moments of apparent calm, the possibility of attack was never far away. Soldiers had to remain vigilant, their senses constantly attuned to danger. This level of continuous alertness was mentally exhausting. Unlike the short bursts of stress experienced in civilian life, soldiers faced prolonged exposure to fear and uncertainty. The brain, conditioned to anticipate threat, remained in a heightened state of arousal for days, weeks, or even months at a time. The effects of this constant stress were profound, influencing decision-making, perception, and emotional regulation. Sleep deprivation was a common and relentless challenge. Soldiers often went long periods without adequate rest, whether due to patrol duties, combat operations, or the need to maintain vigilance. Even when sleep was possible, it was often fragmented, uncomfortable, or interrupted by the sounds of artillery, gunfire, or the cries of comrades. Fatigue compounded the psychological strain, reducing cognitive performance, increasing irritability, and heightening emotional responses. Soldiers learned to function under extreme exhaustion, relying on training, discipline, and small routines to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Yet even the most resilient individuals struggled with the long-term effects of chronic sleep deprivation. Fear was an omnipresent companion. Unlike the controlled environments of boot camp or training exercises, real combat offered no predictability or guarantees. Soldiers faced bullets, artillery, bombs, and the unpredictable actions of both allies and enemies. This fear was not abstract. It was immediate and visceral, affecting the body as well as the mind. Heart rates accelerated, muscles tensed, and adrenaline surged. While fear could enhance awareness and quick decision-making, it also carried risks, potentially causing hesitation or overreaction. Soldiers had to learn to manage fear, channeling it into focus and action rather than allowing it to overwhelm them. Veterans often reflected on the first few moments under fire as the most terrifying, yet with experience, many learned to regulate their responses, developing a form of controlled fear that could enhance survival rather than impede it. Witnessing death and injury was a profound psychological burden. Soldiers frequently saw comrades fall, civilians caught in crossfire, or enemy combatants killed or maimed. These experiences could be deeply traumatic, particularly when occurring in close proximity or unexpectedly. For some soldiers, repeated exposure led to emotional numbing, a protective mechanism that allowed them to continue functioning despite horror and grief. Others struggled with intense grief, guilt, or moral conflict. The psychological impact of these experiences was long-lasting, shaping perspectives and emotional responses for years after the war. The mind had to find ways to process these events, often without the support systems available in civilian life. Isolation and separation from home compounded psychological stress. Soldiers were often far from family, friends, and familiar environments for months or years at a time. Communication was limited to occasional letters or brief messages, leaving soldiers uncertain about the safety and well-being of loved ones. This isolation could intensify feelings of loneliness, homesickness, and vulnerability. The mental challenge of enduring separation while simultaneously facing the immediate dangers of combat was a significant aspect of psychological survival. Soldiers developed coping mechanisms, relying on camaraderie with fellow soldiers, routines, and small comforts to maintain emotional stability. Combat stress could manifest in a variety of ways, including hypervigilance, irritability, nightmares, and emotional exhaustion. Soldiers described a heightened awareness of danger that persisted even in moments of relative safety. This hypervigilance was adaptive on the battlefield, yet it could also exacerbate stress and interfere with relaxation or recovery. Emotional regulation became a daily task as soldiers balanced fear, grief, anger, and hope while continuing to perform duties and support their comrades. Training helped prepare soldiers for some aspects of this stress, but the unpredictable reality of combat often exceeded expectations. The phenomenon known at the time as battle fatigue was a common response to prolonged combat stress. Today, we recognize many of these cases as post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), but at the time, understanding and treatment were limited. Symptoms included anxiety, depression, nightmares, irritability, physical complaints, and difficulty functioning in daily tasks. Battle fatigue was not a sign of weakness. It was a natural response to the extreme psychological demands of war. Units often developed informal support systems to help affected soldiers, while medical personnel provided treatment when available. Yet many soldiers endured these symptoms with little relief, learning to manage through personal resilience and the support of comrades. Humor and camaraderie were powerful tools for psychological survival. Despite the horrors of combat, soldiers often found moments of levity, joking, teasing, or sharing stories to relieve tension. Laughter served as a temporary reprieve from fear and grief, reinforcing bonds between soldiers and providing a sense of normalcy. These moments of connection were essential for morale, helping soldiers endure extended periods of stress and hardship. Small rituals, such as sharing a meal, writing letters, or celebrating birthdays, also provided structure and emotional comfort. Coping mechanisms extended beyond social interaction. Soldiers often relied on mental strategies to manage fear and stress, such as focusing on immediate tasks, breaking problems into smaller steps, or visualizing successful outcomes. Some found solace in faith or spiritual beliefs, while others drew strength from personal values or commitments to comrades and country. These strategies helped soldiers navigate the psychological challenges of combat, allowing them to maintain functionality and resilience despite ongoing danger and trauma. The moral and ethical dimensions of combat added additional psychological complexity. Soldiers frequently faced decisions with profound consequences, affecting civilians, prisoners, and fellow soldiers. Making choices under extreme pressure, often with incomplete information, could induce guilt, doubt, or moral injury. Soldiers had to reconcile personal values with the demands of military objectives and survival. These experiences could leave lasting impressions, influencing post-war perspectives and emotional well-being. Training, experience, and guidance from leaders helped, but the ethical and moral challenges of combat remained a persistent aspect of psychological strain. Environmental factors also contributed to psychological stress. Soldiers faced extreme heat, cold, humidity, and weather conditions that affected both physical comfort and mental state. Poor living conditions, scarcity of food and water, and limited sanitation heightened the sense of vulnerability. The mind had to constantly adapt to these stressors, integrating them into the broader context of survival. Soldiers who successfully managed these environmental challenges developed resilience, learning to endure discomfort while maintaining focus on immediate tasks. Combat also demanded acute attention and rapid decision-making. Soldiers were required to assess threats, respond under fire, and coordinate with comrades, all while under extreme psychological pressure. Mistakes could be fatal, reinforcing the importance of focus, discipline, and mental agility. Experience gradually honed these skills, allowing soldiers to anticipate danger, evaluate options, and act decisively. The development of these abilities was crucial for both survival and operational effectiveness. Psychological resilience was often linked to the quality of leadership and support within units. Commanders who demonstrated competence, empathy, and decisiveness could significantly enhance morale and reduce stress. Soldiers relied on clear guidance, reassurance, and encouragement, particularly in high-pressure situations. Units with strong cohesion and trust were better able to withstand psychological challenges, as soldiers felt supported and understood. Conversely, poor leadership or fractured units could exacerbate stress, erode confidence, and compromise both individual and group survival. Survival in combat was therefore as much about managing the mind as the body. Soldiers had to balance fear, fatigue, grief, and uncertainty while maintaining alertness, coordination, and functionality. Mental endurance became a skill as critical as marksmanship or physical fitness. Soldiers developed habits, routines, and strategies to maintain psychological stability, drawing on training, experience, social support, and personal coping mechanisms. Those who succeeded did so through a combination of resilience, adaptability, and determination. After combat, psychological challenges often continued. Veterans frequently struggled with lingering trauma, nightmares, anxiety, and emotional distress. Reintegration into civilian life could be difficult, as the intensity and immediacy of wartime experiences contrasted sharply with peacetime routines. Many soldiers carried the mental scars of combat for decades, shaping personal relationships, career paths, and overall well-being. Yet the experiences of World War II also demonstrated remarkable human resilience. Soldiers adapted to extreme conditions, coped with profound stress, and maintained functionality under extraordinary circumstances, illustrating the capacity of the human mind to endure and recover from trauma. Understanding the psychological challenges faced by American soldiers provides a deeper insight into the realities of war. Physical danger, while immediate and visible, was only one dimension of survival. The mental and emotional demands, fear, stress, trauma, isolation, and ethical dilemmas, were equally critical, shaping decisions, behaviors, and outcomes. Soldiers who survived not only endured bullets and bombs, but also navigated the complex terrain of the human psyche under extreme duress. Their experiences highlight the interplay between mental resilience, social support, training, and adaptive strategies, offering profound lessons about human endurance in the face of unimaginable adversity. Coping strategies were often improvised and personalized. Some soldiers developed rituals or routines that provided structure and a sense of control. Others focused on short-term goals, breaking long campaigns into manageable segments. Humor, storytelling, and shared experiences reinforced bonds and provided emotional relief. Faith, spirituality, or philosophical reflection offered meaning in an environment where death and suffering were constant. The diversity of coping mechanisms underscores the complexity of psychological survival and the adaptability required to endure extreme stress. Ultimately, the question of whether one could survive psychologically as an American soldier in World War II was not determined solely by strength, skill, or courage. It depended on the capacity to adapt to fear, trauma, and isolation, to maintain focus, decision-making, and morale, and to find meaning, support, and resilience amid chaos. Soldiers who endured did so through a combination of mental fortitude, experience, social cohesion, and coping strategies that allowed them to navigate one of the most psychologically demanding environments in human history. Their survival offers a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human mind, as well as a sobering reminder of the hidden costs of war that extend far beyond the battlefield. Survival as an American soldier in World War II was not simply a matter of physical fitness, combat skill, or training. It was a complex interplay of endurance, adaptability, psychological resilience, decision-making, and sheer determination. The question, "Could you survive?" is not hypothetical in the traditional sense, because the challenges faced by soldiers were tangible, relentless, and often life-threatening. To understand the reality of survival, one must examine every aspect of a soldier's experience, from boot camp to the battlefield, from environmental hazards to psychological strain, and from moral dilemmas to the unpredictable role of chance. When recruits first arrived at boot camp, they were ordinary civilians thrust into an extraordinary environment. The sudden loss of autonomy, the strict schedule, and the unrelenting physical and mental challenges were designed to transform them into soldiers capable of enduring the rigors of war. The initial shock could be overwhelming. For some, it was motivating, instilling discipline and confidence. For others, it was disorienting and exhausting. Survival in this context required a willingness to adapt, to embrace discomfort, and to learn to rely on both training and camaraderie. Soldiers quickly realized that their success depended on mastering the fundamentals of military life: physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, teamwork, and mental toughness. Those who struggled in boot camp were at a distinct disadvantage. If they could not endure the controlled chaos of training, the uncontrolled chaos of the battlefield would be exponentially more difficult. Physical endurance was only the first hurdle. Soldiers were required to operate under extreme fatigue, hunger, and environmental stress. In Europe, the trenches were wet, cold, and infested with vermin. Mud and stagnant water caused trench foot and illness, while artillery barrages and enemy fire created constant danger. In the Pacific, dense jungles, swamps, and tropical diseases presented equally deadly challenges. Soldiers had to navigate terrain that was often unfamiliar and treacherous, maintain their equipment, and conserve energy while remaining alert to invisible threats. The physical environment itself was a battlefield, and mastery of it was essential for survival. Adaptability, resourcefulness, and the ability to endure discomfort became as critical as courage or marksmanship. Combat introduced an entirely new set of challenges. The unpredictability of warfare meant that every moment carried the potential for sudden death or injury. Soldiers faced machine guns, sniper fire, artillery, mines, booby traps, and ambushes. Every decision, no matter how small, had immediate consequences. Success often depended on quick thinking, situational awareness, and coordination with others. Panic could be deadly, while hesitation or indecision could compromise not only one's own survival but that of comrades. Soldiers had to balance instinct with training, fear with action, and caution with the necessity of taking risks. The battlefield demanded both physical skill and mental acuity in equal measure. Teamwork and camaraderie were often the difference between survival and disaster. Soldiers relied on their units to cover flanks, provide suppressive fire, evacuate the wounded, and communicate critical information. Trust and cohesion within a group were essential. A soldier who acted recklessly or failed to cooperate could endanger the entire unit. Conversely, strong relationships and mutual support could compensate for individual weaknesses, helping soldiers endure situations that might otherwise have been fatal. The bonds forged in the heat of combat became both lifelines and sources of morale, demonstrating that survival was rarely an individual endeavor. Psychological resilience was perhaps the most crucial and least visible factor in survival. Soldiers faced prolonged stress, fear, grief, and moral dilemmas. Sleep deprivation, constant alertness, and repeated exposure to death and injury created conditions that tested the limits of mental endurance. Battle fatigue, known today as post-traumatic stress disorder, was common. Soldiers experienced anxiety, nightmares, emotional numbness, and hypervigilance. Those who survived developed strategies to manage these pressures. Humor, storytelling, ritual, and camaraderie provided temporary relief, while personal beliefs, discipline, and focus on immediate tasks helped sustain functionality. Mental toughness was not innate for everyone. It had to be cultivated through experience, support, and adaptive coping strategies. Luck also played an undeniable role. Even the most skilled, disciplined, and resilient soldiers faced situations beyond their control. A stray bullet, a miscalculated step, a sudden enemy maneuver, these could determine